Hi guys, this is Jim with Performance Technologies, back with a new project for you. This time a 1990 Nissan 300ZX twin turbo. We'll be tearing down the engine in this video. The car itself already has a new engine in it. I built it and put it in. So we're going to go through the teardown process for this one. First we'll start with the passenger side plenum bracket. This is a bracket that stabilizes the upper intake plenum. There's one on each side. They also mount the boost control solenoids that are used by the stock computer system that operate the wastegates on the turbos. We'll get those out of the way, and then we'll rip the cam covers off. I'm also going to remove these spark plug tubes. You always want to blow these tubes out before you pull any plugs out. Common problem on these is when you pull the spark plugs out, all the dirt and debris that's trapped down in there, even though there's plug wires that go down in there and they're supposed to seal at the tops, they don't always. And if you just go pulling spark plugs, any trash that's in there gets dropped directly into the cylinders on top of your pistons, and that really scrapes up the cylinder walls after a time. These are a plastic piece. There's 3 tubes on each side because it's a 6-cylinder, and they just come out with 10mm headed bolts, and the whole piece will lift out. They have soft rubber seals on the ends. Those are to seal against the heads to keep water, oil, that sort of stuff from seeping into the spark plug wells of the heads. You want to check those seals, make sure they're nice and soft, they're not all brittle and cracked. If they are, replace them. They do an important job. There's also 2 seals, one upper and one lower, on each of the spark plug tube assemblies. We're going to rip these valve covers off, or cam covers I should say. Now the lower cam covers on each side are glued on with RTV silicone from the factory and any shop. There are no gaskets that are used here. The upper cam covers are gasketed, so you need to persuade these things to come off. A rubber mallet does just fine. Once you break loose that seal, they'll come right off. And you just gotta peel all the Gorilla Snot out of everything, and always check the inside of the cam covers, the cam area inside the head, to see if there's any buildup, any milky looking substance that would indicate water in the oil or anything like that. These are nice and clean. There's no crustation, there's no buildup, there's just discoloration from heated oil. Everything looks really nice so far. The cam looks like it has virtually no wear. Like I say, the upper one uses a number 3 Phillips screwdriver. It's a larger size than a standard Phillips. You can use a standard size if you're careful. And same thing, these are gasketed so that they're not glued down. They just come straight off, and they do have a gasket. You'll always want to replace the gaskets. Again, they're nice and clean inside. There's no buildup. There's no waxy residue. You always want to check that. It gives you a good indication of how the engine has been treated, how frequent it's had maintenance done, that it's had good frequency of oil changes, things like that. As oil wears, it breaks down and it turns to either a paraffin or asphalt base, which is what oils are based on. There are 2 different types of bases, either paraffin or asphalt, and they break down into their base and they make a really nasty gooey buildup. And so the lack of that tells you that the engine's been taken pretty good care of. Okay, so we're continuing now to the front of the engine. We're going to pull the timing belt covers off of this thing. The driver's side is pretty straightforward. There's no real obstructions to get it off. Passenger side is a little more difficult. There are some hidden bolts. You have to pull the coolant tubes off first. Now we're going to pull the coolant tubes off the front of the engine. These are held on with 5.5 millimeter Allen head bolts and a couple of rubber tubes under each one. After your bolts are out, you just want to get those stub hoses that go from the tubes into the block. They're a little short, stubby, 2.5, maybe 3-inch long piece of hose. There's 2 of them there, and they're clamped. Get those clamps off. Run a screwdriver between the aluminum and the rubber as far around the hose as you can to help break them loose. It makes it a lot easier to get these tubes out. The lower tube contains the thermostat. It looks like it's been replaced pretty recently. That's a good sign. This is a replacement engine. It is not the original engine that came with the car. I'm sure it's probably a JDM replacement or something of that nature. It doesn't look like it has more than about 65,000-70,000 miles, if that, judging by the cam wear and the way the internals look so far. We'll know more after we get the heads off. As you can see, these tubes can be a little stubborn. Those hoses kind of weld themselves onto the aluminum. It's not a big deal. We're going to replace them anyway. Now we can go ahead and get the passenger side timing belt cover off. And that cover has a little bit of a breakage in there on the top bolt. I'll either replace it or plastic weld it. Now we are going to need to pull the front pulley off of this engine before we can get the lower covers off. I think that was a 24 millimeter bolt. I'm not certain of that. That sounds familiar though. And I'm going to use a 1/2-inch impact here. It also helps if you turn the impact air up to full instead of half like I have it right now. We're just going to use a simple puller, and we're going to leave the bolt in there finger tight so that we can push against that with the puller. It's just a standard 2-jaw puller that you use for many types of pulleys. These harmonic balancers are not press fit, they're interference fit, so they aren't terribly tight on there unless you've got some rust issues or something like that. And as soon as you break the rust loose, it'll come off pretty easily. As you can see, I'm just using a damn crescent wrench, and it's coming right off. You just keep going until you can feel it get loose. You'll feel the puller get loose in your hand. It'll start wobbling back and forth as you try to pull against it, and that means you're just about there. You can at that point generally just take the puller off and pull the balancer off by hand. You see it start wiggling there. It's ready to go. Just take the bolt out that you had in there finger tight. Don't forget to do that. It's hard to pull that damper off with the bolt still in. It just pulls right off. These bottom covers are held on with little 7mm hex head bolts. I believe there's 4 around the outside perimeter and 2 on the inside. And you see I just took the lower alternator bracket off of there also so it wouldn't get in the way. Remember, this is holding in sheet metal, so nothing should be terribly tight. I mean, the space is tight, but the bolts are not. You ought to try doing one of these in the car sometime, doing a timing belt. It's a real treat. Probably the most cramped engine compartment ever created in the world. Just check out your tinware. Make sure that it's not beat up. If it is, you can straighten it pretty easily. These are all in pretty nice shape. Okay, now I'm going to use a Sharpie marker to mark the CAS. That's the cam angle sensor. That's how you set your timing on these cars. It's kind of like an old style distributor. You loosen the 3 bolts and you can turn it to either advance or retard the ignition timing. It also controls the injector fire timing. Now this one is missing a bolt. The bottom bolt, for whatever reason, is missing. There are 3 bolts generally that hold these on, and they're a slotted mounting point so that you can turn it. And only the top 2 bolts are there, and these again are 10mm head. And I'm complaining about that. Isn't antifreeze and transmission oil a great look for hair? Okay, this CAS is locked up pretty tight. It's not going to turn. And that's not a good sign. You don't want to beat the hell out of this thing. This is just tapping on it with a rubber mallet to see if I can get it to break loose, but I already know that's not going to happen. These things get oxidized just from heat, wear, weather, that sort of thing, because it's 2 aluminum parts mating. That mounting bracket is aluminum, so is the CAS. So we're just going to coax it, try to get it to turn a little bit. As soon as we can get that oxidation broken loose, then we can get it pulled out. And these do just pull straight out, generally. You can twist them around a little bit and pull them straight out. Now it's moving around a little. Now you can get a small screwdriver under these little ears that stick out where the mounting bolts go in, and you got to gently pry. You don't want to break anything. Just gently pry these up one at a time and it'll lift out generally. This one's being sort of a bitch. Just be patient, keep going around it. Don't get mad, don't get a hammer, and don't get a pry bar. And there you go. The only thing holding these things in is an O-ring and a little bit of oil. There's a spline shaft there that goes into the end of that CAS, and there's an O-ring on that shaft. And there is some oil present, and it may feel like it's spring loaded while you're trying to pull it out, and that's the vacuum created from the oil behind that O-ring trying to suck it back. It is not spring loaded. There's nothing under there retaining it. There are no clips or anything like that. You can just pull it straight out and it'll kind of pop when it comes out. Now the mounting bracket. I'm going to try to take this thing off. It's being just a real bitch about coming off. The only thing left on here is the dowel pins that are keeping it located, but they've oxidized as well. We already removed the 3 bolts. I say we because you're helping on this, right? A great shot of my back. Okay, finally. Now we just want to make sure we get the mechanical timing set before we keep tearing this thing down any farther. So we're going to line up the number 1 mark on the crankshaft with the number 1 mark on that lower oil pump flange. I'm going to use a chain wrench here. We're going to turn this thing backwards about 20-25 teeth. Not horribly far, but I want to turn it back and then go forward again to get the number 1 lined up. There's a notch in that lower oil pump flange, and there's a stamped dot on the lower crank gear for that belt, on the belt drive, the timing belt drive. And they're all lined up, and then you can check your cam timing. Each cam has a mark that should line up with the corresponding mark on the back plate. You can see that exhaust cam right there is 2 teeth off. So that's part of the problem with the running of this engine when it came out. Its symptoms were that it wouldn't rev above about 2,500 RPM. It had some horrible ignition and fuel problems. It had low compression on 3 cylinders, although the low compression very likely is related to the fuel problem. It's got 3 different types of injectors in it. Yes, 3 different sizes of injectors in it. So somebody's been playing with it that doesn't know a hell of a lot about what they're doing. The problem with injectors, if they're locked open, which I suspect at least a few of these were, with the amount of black smoke and plug fouling that was going on, is it'll wash down the rings, and then they won't seal, so you get low compression. And that may be one of the things that was going on. We had some ignition problems. There were a lot of broken wires. The wiring harnesses on these cars, after they get old, they get real brittle. Now we're going to rip this belt tensioner off of here. It's a hydraulic device. It uses a hydraulic ram cylinder. It's self-contained. Later I'll show you how to recompress and test that cylinder to see if it's good or not. Or we can just replace it. It looks like, because of the condition of the belt and the idlers and that tensioner, that all of this was done when the engine was replaced, which I don't think was terribly long ago. I am putting those bolts back in for the tensioner. Specialty bolts, or bolts that come out of specific places that I want to make sure get back in the same place again, I usually put back where they came from. I'll do that again on the cams here in a little while. That way I don't have to wonder where they are or dig for them. Now, as you saw, the passenger side head on these cars, the cams are spring opposed when they're in top dead center. Now they'll stay at top dead center unless you bump them or something like that. But if you do bump them, they will spring shut. Don't let that scare you. It won't hurt anything. I always relieve the spring tension, as you saw there a second ago. I relieve the spring tension anyway. But it won't hurt anything if they do spring shut. It's not slamming into pistons or anything like that. It's just closing some valves. These intake cams, as you can see, they have this steel cover over the ends. They're held on with 4 little bitty, I don't remember the size of them, I think they're 5mm bolts. They do contain a rather large spring. It looks like a short valve spring. It's a rather large diameter spring, and that's part of the variable valve timing that these engines use. Many people don't know that this was actually one of the very first engines to use variable valve timing, several years before Honda came out with it. But you just grab it like that with your hand around the back of the gear and put your thumb on the front to hold that plate still. And it only tries to come out about 1/4 inch. It's not a long spring. And don't worry if you get some oil drippage. It's supposed to have oil in there. The camshafts do have oil running through them. It's also part of the variable valve timing assembly. Now we can pull those gears off of there. The exhaust cams, the gears are held on with 4 10mm head bolts, and they're about 45 foot-pounds, something of that nature. Actually, they may be 12mm. The air ratchet I'm using, as you may or may not be able to hear, is an impact style air ratchet. It's not a standard type air ratchet. So it's made to loosen bolts like this without slamming your hand into whatever's close. It doesn't produce the same amount of torque as a big 1/2-inch drive sucker though, so you don't have to worry about ripping the heads of bolts off. It produces about 70 foot-pounds of torque. There's a little retaining plate with the 4 bolts, and then the gears come right off. They have a single pin to locate the gear and keep it straight on the shaft. And again, I'm going to put the retaining plate and all 4 screws back in that cam, so I know where they are when I get ready to put it back together. Now we'll pull the intakes off. I believe that's a 19mm head bolt in the center of the cam, and we'll use the 1/2-inch impact on it. And as you can hear, I did turn the air volume up. Don't be afraid if oil runs out of these things when you pull it out. It's supposed to. Just twist them back and forth a little bit and pull straight out, and they should come right off. They're held on, the intakes are held on with Woodruff keys. And again, I'm going to put the bolts back in the end of the cams, instead of my bolt box where I'll never find them again. The idlers don't make a sound, and they're not loose, so as I said, these the service on this engine was probably done when it was replaced, and I'd guess it doesn't have many miles on it since the engine was replaced in this car. I'm betting that it was simply wiring harness and poor choice of injectors and that sort of stuff that was causing the problem. But since we were building an engine for the car anyway, it didn't really matter. It had to come out one way or the other. The idlers are a bolt-on. You just put them on, run the bolt all the way down. It's got a sleeve that goes against the block. A little rust on it, but the engine has been sitting for a while. Now the backing plates come off easily. Where the hell did a green headed bolt come from? Okay, for our final trick on this video, we're going to yank the intake off. I prefer to yank the intake as a complete unit instead of pulling the injectors and fuel rails separately. I just like to lift it off as a complete assembly. On all four corners, front and rear, the four corners of the manifold, there are studs. And on those studs are 12mm nuts. And that's a wonderful thing, except that it makes these manifolds a particular pain in the ass to pull off. You also have to remove a water crossover tube on the back of the engine there, or it'll get in the way of the intake flange. So we've got the corners broken loose. Now we're going to go down and break all the other bolts loose, and they are the same 5.5mm Allen heads that you used for the timing covers. Getting some miscellaneous junk off the back of the engine. And now we're going to pry this puppy up, make sure it's broken loose front and back. Now, the reason I say they're a pain to work with is because those studs on the front and rear corners require that you pull the manifold almost straight up, almost perfectly straight up. If you cock it forward, back, side to side, it'll bind on those studs. The holes that are drilled into the manifold are just slightly larger than those studs. So you've just got to kind of hold your mouth right and wiggle this thing back and forth while you're trying to get it pulled off of here. It'll drive you crazy. One part will be free, and you'll go to get the front part free, the back will drop. It's kind of like a comedy. So we're going to try and pry the front while we're lifting the back, and wow, that actually worked. That wire, that cable that we're getting out of the way there, that's for the knock sensor. It goes under that manifold into the top of the block. Now we're just going to do a little port inspection, see how the back of the valves look, make sure the valves are still there. See if any of them are locked open or bent, anything like that. Okay, that's all for this one. We'll get back with you on the next one. Until then, have fun, drive safe, and we'll see you guys later.